your life is made of all of these small moments.
Mm.
The more you can like slow down and tune into them, the more just joy you have in your life, which is like, what else is the purpose of all of this?
All right, welcome everyone. I am so excited to be here today with Goli Kalkhoran. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
So let's just kick it right off with you telling everyone a little bit about you and sort of what brings you to today, this moment in time.
Yeah, thanks so much. I had a previous career as an attorney. I was one of many people who had sort of put my head down, decided I was going to be a lawyer at a very young age, at like 11, and never wavered and did well in school, went to a great law school, started practicing as a lawyer, and like many people in a lot of careers, found myself very unhappy, extremely just miserable. And I worked as a lawyer in a different couple of different fields. I ended up being a public defender for a number of years, and I was very passionate about the work, but just it was not sustainable for me. And I eventually quit in 2014 when I had my first son, not really knowing what I was going to do and feeling very lost and ashamed and like a failure and all of the things that tend to come with that big of an identity shift because I'd never done anything else and I had no idea what else I would do.
Mm.
And then fast forward, that led me kind of on this journey of really figuring out who I was and what I wanted to do. And eventually I started a photo booth business. That sort of just shifted who I was. And I ultimately started a podcast in 2018 called Lessons from a Quitter. And that's really the platform that I run now. And it was because I wanted to have this conversation. I wanted to have like, I saw so many people so unhappy in their
Mm.
careers, but it was just this idea of, well, especially like if you're quote unquote successful, in society's
Mm.
eyes, like you're doing something that other people respect or has prestige, you're making good money, you've sort of made it, and you're like, well, this can't be it. And I found myself there, and now that sort of led me into mindset coaching and kind of career coaching. And now I'm a master certified coach and I help people really on their own, like their own inner work. And I don't do career coaching in the sense of like, let's work on your resume. It's more
Mhm.
figuring out the people pleasing and the perfectionism and all the things that keep us stuck because, what's everyone going to say? And what will it look like if I
Mm.
start over? And I don't want to be a failure and all of that stuff. So I run programs and I have a podcast and you can find me on social. And so that's what brings me to today, what I do today. And I love it.
I love it. So, do you find like when you start to dig into some of those themes with folks, the like people pleasing, the perfectionism, like those are scary, big topics. Like there's a lot to unravel there. Do
Yeah.
you have folks sort of start to dip their toe in and then be like, eek, like not ready yet?
Definitely. Definitely. And I think that's why, like, I actually get people who really listen to me for a really long time before
Mm.
they ever join my program. And so I think, and that's why I love doing a podcast because I think for myself included, it took me a while to really even come to terms with myself, like even admit to myself that I was going to quit or that I was going to leave. And
Mm.
these are very scary ideas because you're changing your identity sort of. And it's all, if I'm not the overachiever, if I'm not the one that makes everybody
Mm.
happy, then who am I? Like that's all I've ever been my whole life.
Mm.
And so I do find a lot of people are not ready to work with me in the beginning because it's very overwhelming to take in these
Mhm.
concepts and change how you're going to relate to the world. Um, and so usually when they come to me, they've been listening for about 6 months to a year, and they're like, "Okay, I've dipped my toe in. Everything you say, people always tell me is like it's. I feel like you're in my head. Like I feel
Mm.
like you're saying every experience I've
Mm.
had." And then they become more comfortable to like do the deeper work, and it's like, okay, I clearly have this issue. I want to address it. I don't want to keep living like this. And then they're ready to kind of get going.
Mm. Are there a few like kind of core lies that you feel like we tell ourselves that are the hardest to sort of break from?
Yes, I think that, and it's really interesting when you say this. Like, all of us have the same exact fears, and it's like a handful. It's not. There's not millions of. It all comes down to the same thing. And I will tell you, every single thing, every single maladaptive behavior we have underlying it is some kind of self-worth issue, right? So the reason we do anything, the reason we want to be perfect, because we want people to see, we don't want anyone to criticize us. The reason we want other people to be happy is like we just want to feel like we're worthy. We want people to tell us we're good enough, right? The reason we
Mm,
achieve all of this stuff. So that's sort of the core at what you have to work at is like giving yourself that validation that we so desperately seek from everybody around
mm,
us. And so the two biggest things that I think are the bedrock of what I work on and I see as like the root of every issue. One is this lie and that has told us that we can't trust ourselves. So it's like a lack of
mm,
self-trust. And so we're constantly seeking other people's opinions or wanting someone else to tell us the path because we for some reason believe like
mm,
what I feel within me, whether you want to call it intuition or your gut or whatever it is, just the choice I make, I can't rely on that. Um, one is self-trust and one is shame. Like
mm,
really the bedrock of every maladaptive behavior is this underlying thing of shame. And there's this fear of like, maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe, like all of our inner critic, all of the voices that we hear, they're constantly telling us how terrible we are and how like, I'm such a hot mess
mm,
and I never get it right. And why am I? It's all this shame that doesn't need to be there. It's really unnecessary kind of suffering that has been implanted in us from when we were children, through every experience that we've had. And I think when you can kind of clean up shame and you can really work on trusting yourself, everything else is super easy. Like it's easy then
mm,
to put on boundaries. It's easy to not be perfect. If
mm,
I don't have to put on an air that I'm somehow inhuman and I don't make mistakes, right? If I can just show up as my fully flawed self because I don't find shame in that, I'm just like, yeah, of course I made a mistake. Of course I'm gonna, look over
mm,
things. I have a human brain. It's so much easier to not have to need to
mm,
be perfect, to not have anxiety all the time, to not have the need for everybody to like us, right? Because then it's like, okay, you don't like me, that's cool. I like me, right? Like you don't have to, everyone doesn't have to
mm,
like me. And so those are really what I work on. I think like it
mm.
shows itself in different forms. People, we all kind of adopt a different way, but it's really just getting to the core of that. Like, how do I increase that kind of self trust and that self worth so that I don't have to run from this shame that like doesn't really need to be there?
Hmm. Okay. Wow. So you're hitting on this confidence piece, I think. Like I've been
Yeah.
thinking a lot about confidence recently and how the perception, I think, of confidence is that it comes with a certain level of external validation. And I even heard this from my parents recently. Like my business has grown a lot in the last few years, and they sort of were like, yeah, it's made you so confident. And I was like,
Mm,
no, my confidence grew my business, and my
100%.
confidence came from not being afraid of publicly messing up, of saying the wrong thing, of like standing by myself through those things. And so it's this really weird piece that you're talking about, or it's been really weird for me, is like as I've embraced more imperfection, my confidence has grown.
Yeah,
It,
100%.
which is just kind of
Because
the opposite of what we're taught, right?
right, right. And that's such a key thing that you hit on because I think what we mistake is there's a difference between the confidence that we talk about in our society, which really is the mastery of some kind of skill, right? And that only
Mm,
comes from repetition of that skill. So by definition, you cannot be confident in something new that you're doing, right? It's something that you've never done before. And so
mm,
the only
mm,
and so this is where a lot of perfectionism comes from. It's like, well, I have to only do the things I'm good at because that's the only thing I can be confident in. I
mm,
know how to do this. Now I can feel okay versus self confidence, which is confidence in yourself, which is like, I have
mm,
no idea how to do this thing, and I have no idea how it's going to turn out. But I know that I can rely on myself to figure it out. It's not
mm,
that I'm going to get it right every time. It's not that like I'm just going to knock it out of the park. It's that again, going back to kind of the self trust. I think like that's kind of the foundation of even confidence is that as you were saying, like as you've built your own confidence to mess up, to show up and embarrass yourself or whatever and feel whatever emotion you have to feel, it's like a muscle. You gain that confidence, like, yeah, bring it on. Whatever the next thing is.
mm,
I don't know how it's going to turn out. I can't know when I'm going to post something and, maybe people are going to criticize or maybe I mess up and I, have a
mm,
typo and I get embarrassed or whatever the worry is that people have. But I'm like, hey, I'll have my own back. I know I'll figure it out. I'll fix it, you know? And that's what I think a lot of people don't typically think of as a definition of confidence. And I agree with you that the more you build that confidence, the less you need the other kind. It's like, yeah, maybe I don't have this skill mastered. That's okay. Like, I can still show up. I can still do it. I can still have a lot of pride. I can still have a lot of faith in myself to like figure out the next step and the next and the next and keep going.
Yeah, I love that. And I feel like in today's world, in a number of different professions, legal maybe not being one of them, like there sort of is less of that like knowing it all or like knowing enough
Yes.
confidence, right? It's like it's about being adaptive, it's about being resourceful, it's about learning as the world evolves. And so it's like you're not going to, especially in the nonprofit sector, I'm thinking about a number of the people who listen to this, and I see this with fundraisers a lot. Like my biggest thing when I started fundraising was, oh my gosh, I'm so uncomfortable. There's no way that good fundraisers feel this uncomfortable. I
Yes.
must be a bad fundraiser because I
Yes.
don't like talking about money. And nobody was talking about it. The fact that actually just
Mhm.
talking about money is this really scary, vulnerable thing,
Yeah.
and all fundraisers feel it. And so it's like what I needed was self-confidence, but what I was looking for was some level of like expert confidence that doesn't really exist in a position that's so relational and dynamic and things like
Mhm.
that.
Absolutely. And I think like again, even this whole expert confidence, it's sort of this myth, right? Because nobody knows, even let's say in law or medicine, like I deal work with a lot of doctors, and the pressure they put on themselves to sort of be perfect, to
Mm,
never make a mistake, is humanly impossible.
mm,
And that's not what your role is as a doctor or as a lawyer, right? And we've done a really big disservice to sort of give this lie that somehow you get to some
mm,
place and you know everything, because that's just not humanly possible. And so I think that's often the cause of a lot of imposter syndrome is
mm,
we've been fed this lie, and we all walk around kind of with this persona or this armor of I have it all figured out, and then inside we all are filled with doubts and fears, and we all are thinking like, well, I don't know all of this stuff, like obviously, or I
mm,
might make a mistake. And so you start thinking it's just me, everyone else has
mm.
it together. And so that's why you see so many people suffer from imposter syndrome, because they think, instead of everybody talking about like, no, I'm terrified half the time, I have no idea what I'm doing, right? I'm just figuring it out, and
Mm,
I have tons of doubts. I wish I had these tools when I was a lawyer, because a lot of what burned me out was that this air that people put on as if they know everything. And I,
mm,
now I know that to be categorically false. And when I quit, it was like a lot of the partners, the people that were much higher up, would start confiding in like, oh my God, I wish I could leave. I
mm,
feel the same way. I don't know what I'm doing. Like I would have people that
mm,
were partners, right? Working like 15 years in the field, be like, I have no idea what I'm doing. And I'm like, that's also not true. But it's this, it just
mm,
goes to show that exactly what you're sort of talking about is the only way is where there is doubt and there's mistakes and there's no perfection, and we're all kind of, yeah,
mm.
you learn more as you work in a field, but that doesn't like mean that all of a sudden there's never room for learning or all that stuff. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, and because of the perfectionism piece being like a black or white thing, it's kind of like, okay, well, if you aren't perfect, then you must not know at all what you're doing, versus being like,
Exactly.
I know a fair amount about what I'm doing and I'm learning a lot.
100%, absolutely, yeah, it's that all or nothing thinking, right? Where it's like
Yeah.
either I'm perfect like this person and I have it together, which is why so many of us have this, and we go after these goals and we think when I get there, all of a sudden I'll be a different human than every answer and has all this
Yeah.
confidence. And we get there and we're like, oh, I have the same brain and I feel exactly the way I did. I just now have this degree, or I now, I'm
Mm,
doing this work. I got this job title and I still feel just as insecure.
mm,
And it really like rocks a lot of us. But you're absolutely right. I think that it's never, part of the problem is that we don't acknowledge how much we do know, right? We focus on the little bit that like maybe we don't. So we start telling ourselves like, oh, I clearly, if I don't know 100% means I'm a fraud and that everyone's going to find out that I don't know anything. Like that's also not true.
yeah.
So like it sort of becomes, yeah, this double-edged sword that we don't acknowledge what we do know, and we don't realize that it never has to be all or nothing. And it never
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm curious, like for you, because I feel like, okay, as my self-confidence has grown, you said this piece a few minutes ago about how then these other things become easy. Like once you trust yourself and you have some level of like control around the shame, right? Because some amount of shame, I was reading this thing recently that was like, some amount of shame is important. Like the reason our body feels shame is to indicate like, hey, maybe don't do that thing again, perhaps, right? And like sometimes that happens at moments where it's like, we did need that signal, but sometimes it happens at like culturally curated moments that are based on like limiting beliefs where we didn't need that signal.
Right.
So it's more about being able to sort of like flush that out. Like, was that a signal I needed? Was it not a signal I needed? But I would say like for me, it doesn't mean that when I throw down a new boundary, I don't feel uncomfortable. Like I still experience discomfort. I just don't spiral out and change my behavior. So I'm curious, like, what is your sort of like tolerance for that level of discomfort, or what do you work with your clients around? Like, how do they know when they're trusting themselves more, but they're still feeling this discomfort? Because I think this is another place we can get a little bit like black and white, right? We're like, oh, well, I got uncomfortable, so I guess I don't know how to do this thing yet. So I'm just curious what your sort of thoughts are about that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I definitely, I mean, part of what I work on with my clients is really just learning how to process negative emotion because it's not going anywhere. And the more you push out of that comfort zone, by definition, you will be uncomfortable, right? And I think that what we work on is like nothing has gone wrong when you feel, fear and even like disappointment when things don't work out and all of the negative emotions that come from trying new things, failing. Like none of us like to fail. It's not like as I go out and I'm shooting to fail. It's just that it's going to happen if I want to also be successful in what I'm doing. And so we work on that and we try to differentiate. So in psychology, there's the term clean pain versus dirty pain. And so clean pain is, what happens in our lives. Like all feelings are fleeting, all of them are valid. A concept that I really teach a lot on and has really helped me is that life is always 50-50. It doesn't matter how much you accomplish, how much money you make, there's just going to be negative emotions. And when we can stop being afraid of them, it's a lot easier to process and manage. And so we work on figuring out, like, what is the clean pain? For instance, if I do a presentation and it doesn't go the way I want it to, right? And I mess up, let's say, there might be the disappointment that it didn't go. There might be the embarrassment that, my colleagues watched me mess up or whatever, right? That's like, we don't want like toxic positivity where it's like, everything is fine. I'm good. It's like, okay, yeah, this didn't go the way I wanted. How do I process that clean pain versus dirty pain, which is really the unnecessary suffering that we add on. So it's the stories we attach, which is like, I'll never be good at this. I'm, a terrible, whatever lawyer. Everybody else knows more than me. Like whatever it is, it's these stories that we create a lot of suffering where even the shame, what you were talking about, I think there may be a difference between guilt and shame. And I think guilt might be like, I did something wrong versus shame being like, I am wrong. Like there's something wrong with me. And so I think guilt is absolutely a healthy emotion to have to help you kind of live along with your own morals and values. I don't know how valuable shame is in a lot of instances. And I think the question becomes like, where is that guilt valid and, part of the clean pain, and where is it that we've been socialized to feel guilty every time somebody is upset, right? Like just because somebody else is upset doesn't mean I did something wrong. It just means that maybe they don't like that there's a boundary or whatnot, right? So this is an art more than a science. It's really figuring out for myself, like, where do I want to feel guilty? Because yes, I messed up and I can again like take in the fact that I'm a human and I'll make mistakes and I'll make amends. And where do I not want to feel guilty? Because just because I've said no to somebody doesn't mean I've done anything wrong, right? Like they might still feel a human emotion and get upset that I told them no. And I don't have to sit and, wallow in the fact that I'm a terrible person. Because if I'm a people pleaser, that's what I'm going to do, right? If I'm just going to feel bad saying no to somebody. So it's really just figuring out like, where is this a healthy emotion that I want to actually like process and let myself feel and be okay with? And where am I really just layering on a lot of unnecessary suffering by creating like stories for myself?
Yeah, I love that. I had someone on the podcast, Deetra Giles, who's a coach, and she had this really interesting or amazing quote where she said, she was like, we're told that our life is made up of like all the circumstances or situations. She was like, but it's not, it's made up of, or it's a culmination of what we've made those circumstances mean.
100%.
And so I couldn't agree. I couldn't agree with that more. So I'm curious, one of the things I feel like my clients really struggle with is, okay, they start to see these patterns of sort of people pleasing, perfectionism. They start to maybe even be able to deal with this sort of clean pain, dirty pain piece. And then they're looking to redefine what success looks like for them. And they're sort of like, okay, so if I'm not going to buy into just, because a lot of what can get roped into that is like, growth, scale, like all these different things. And one of the tensions, I think that I'm sure this came out in my business too, where I was like growing really fast. And I was like, wait, do I want to run that business? I was like, I don't. Why am I doing that? Oh, because everybody's like, go Mallory. I was like, okay, so like, what business do I want? And like trying to sort of unravel that. And I was saying just to my husband the other day, I said, so I know that I've restructured my business. I've stabilized it. I'm not growing the way I was, all consciously. And I still will get wrapped up in a moment where I like lose my consciousness around my sort of like decision making around success, find myself taking an opportunity and then be like, wait, why did I do that? Like, and so let alone my need to like maybe have a better framework for how I say yes and no. I'm just curious, like, how do you help folks or think about how people can sort of redefine success for them in a way that feels, I don't know, maybe it doesn't feel soothing. Maybe it is always uncomfortable, but it's like contradictory to like sort of the type of success we get external validation from.
Yeah. I think that's a great question. And again, when I talk a lot about self-trust, is part of this idea that like we will ever get to some destination where all of a sudden, like we have this belief that we are at some point like static beings. Like this is what's going to be my definition of success. And once I know that, then that's it. And I have to get there. But all of it is fluid, right? All of it is ever changing. You're an ever changing person. And so what you might decide is success for you right now, and maybe you need to stabilize in a month, in a day, in a year, you may decide, I actually want a lot of growth now. I actually want like even that. And so I say that to say, because I don't think there's like a bad or a good way of like having success. And I think it's really important when I talk about like really trusting yourself and checking in, like, what is it that I want? So when I work with the people I work with, it's really like giving yourself the time to figure out like, why do I want this thing? Is it because like I'll think I'll be good enough if I like make this much money, or my parents will finally be proud of me, or whatever. Like those aren't great reasons to go after things. And so when we work on like defining success for ourselves, it's a wide spectrum. Some people really do want to have like the big company and make tons of money and have a lot of people under them. And for other people, success is, I want to work 4 hours a day and I want to be able to like read my book, and I don't want to have any employees, or and I want to work for somebody else or whatever it is. It's all valid. It's just a matter of like, what is it that you want? And I think for a lot of people, what I try to work on is, and that's okay if it changes. You don't, I think we often think there's some right answer that I have to find. And I have to know that, and I have to define it, and that's who I am. And when I sort of let go of the reins a little bit, and I know for myself, for instance, in my own business, like, of course I'm going to keep changing. And every season for me is going to change. I have 2 young children, right? What I want now versus what I want in 5 years will be very different. And that's okay. And I keep getting to know myself, and I keep like, I envision it like, it's like just you take a step, you evaluate, you pivot, right? That's all of life. And so as I do this, like I might even get caught in like, no, I really believe that the reason what success means to me is X, Y, and Z, is making this much money and working this much, whatnot. And I might get there and be like, oh, why am I doing like exactly what you said? Like, why did I say yes to these things? Well, that just gives me more information about myself, instead of me making that mean exactly what we were just talking about, like making a circumstance mean something, attaching a story, instead of me saying like, see, I don't even know what I want. I can't trust myself. I thought I wanted this and I don't. And it means that I have no idea, I'm just giving into, let's say, society. I just take that as like, oh, what was I missing? What red flags was I
Mm,
ignoring? Like, I was still, yeah, I'm still seeking that validation. I don't beat myself up for that. Of course I still am. Like, that's what I've
mhm.
been programmed my whole life to do, right? Like, of course I'm going to keep falling into that. Of course that feels good to me, right? So it's like with each thing, I either just remind myself exactly what you're saying, right? It's like, oh, why am I saying yes to this again? Like, this is not the business I want. And just allowing myself to change my mind, because then
Mm,
sometimes I'm like, maybe I do want to make a lot of money.
mm.
Maybe I do want to grow this and have a huge business. That sounds like fun, right? Like maybe I'll learn a ton about myself in like
Mm,
managing employees. Like none of it is right or wrong. It's just the more you learn to quiet down and listen to like what is it that I want and why do I want those things? Like get really clear on the
mm,
reasons behind the decision, not the decision. And if you like those reasons, like if it's not because I
mm,
just want other people to like me, right? If
mhm,
it's things that like, then like, okay, then I'm gonna try it. And then I might change my mind again. And you know,
mhm.
there's no like set point where you just become like you've arrived and now you know everything about yourself and you're never gonna change your mind again.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you brought up a really like interesting part of that. I mean, I totally agree with everything that you said. And I have a young daughter and am probably going to be starting like IVF soon. And so it's been this interesting moment of sort of recognizing the Venn diagram that's our lives, particularly as like female leaders in family rearing years, whatever that looks like, or just like, managing sort of all the different pieces of life. Right. And so
Yeah.
I think sometimes we think about success in like one of our circles or like sort of in this siloed compartment. And then it rubs against this other part of our lives. And we're like, how do I think about sort of success or what I want at the meeting point of these things, right? Not just in this area of my life or just in this area of my life. And it sounds like that's something that, you allow for a lot of like dynamic, like evolution of that, really taking into account those certain pieces. Have you noticed any like patterns there or things that sort of throughout this, like having this lens into all of these folks who are, making these changes, any things you've noticed to be particularly helpful in folks thinking through the intersections of their life in that way?
Yeah, like I said, I mean, I think the biggest thing that helps people, and when we talk about this stuff, is really slowing ourselves down to understand that like there are seasons of life and it's all going to change. So your values and wants and needs are going to change, and that's okay. Like I think a lot of times people think they just need to, like I said, like pick
Mm,
something and that be the thing. And so I think what has helped people is when you slow it down, it helps relieve a lot of the stress and the anxiety where it's like, I don't need to
mm,
know what I'm gonna want in 10 years. I need to know, like, in this
mm,
season of my life with my two young children, what's my choice for me right now? Right.
mm,
And I think really like having the time to just explore that, like,
mm,
just explore in a perfect world, if I had everything I needed, what would I choose? Right. And now maybe I don't have all those. And maybe I have financial needs and I have other things that,
mm,
but at least I have my North Star. Like for me right now,
mm,
this is what I want. And I know for me, this was really difficult when I quit the law. Like I had such extreme views on like what I thought I was going to be and what
mm,
I thought I wouldn't like skip a beat when I had kids and I would go back to work and I wanted
mm,
to work full time and I wanted to climb this corporate ladder. And, of course, like as soon as I had a child, everything changed and I
mm,
didn't know how I would feel. But I also, when I quit, like for me, I knew from that beginning that like being a stay at home mom was not an option because I would not like I would lose my mind. I'm just not built with
mm.
that much patience and I'm not that good. It's like I just know it's like the worst thing for me and my children, right? And I felt very lost because I felt like I didn't fit in either camp. And it seems like it was only
Mm,
those two camps. Like you're either a career person
mm,
and you're climbing that ladder,
mm,
or you want to be a stay-at-home mom and you want to really like pour into your children when they're young and all of those things are great. But I was like, that neither one is me. Like,
mm,
how do I have something in the middle? Because I really do want to have my own business or work and do things that I find intellectually stimulating and push me and, you know, And I also don't want to work all the time. And I want to, I had kids for a reason and I want to see them and I want to be able to be a part of their
Mm,
lives. And I remember feeling very lost in that sense. And now when I look back, I realize like, yeah, that was just like I just know myself and I know that like what I needed to feel good about my life and feel fulfilled and feel like what was that kind of percentage for me.
mm,
And again, I say that like as my kids get older, that changes for me,
mhm,
right? And so I think like again, going back to just like self-trust, it was really me just learning like
mm,
at every stage you're allowed to decide what's right for you.
mm,
Nobody else can tell you what it is. It is allowed to change. You are allowed to change and you're going to, right? Like it's funny when we think about it in our present moment, it's hard to see how we're going to change, but when you look back, it's like you're not the same person you were when you were in your 20s, right? Like you're not the same person you are in your 30s or 40s. Like you change, you evolve.
mm,
And so of course, the things that you want change, the things that you think are important change. Like nothing has gone wrong. It's not as though like, oh, we take it as like I was living a lie. I was just
mm,
doing what everybody else said I was. I was so lost. It's like, no, like that was important to me. Maybe making money in my 20s was the most important thing to me. Okay.
mm,
And then my priorities changed. And now something else is more important. Right. And so I think I don't even know if I answered your question, but it was like really slowing down and understanding like
mhm,
what season am I in now? It's going to change in the future. What's important to me right now, just for me in both areas, right? I always try to get people to do really like ideal vision, best case scenario,
mm,
not because I think it's something that you need to get. You don't need to get anywhere to be happy or to, like really be able to have a fulfilled life. But I think it's a good thing to I think so often we suppress what we actually want because we don't think it's possible. So it's
mm,
always like, "Oh, no, I don't need to make a lot of money," or "I don't need, I
mm,
don't want this," or "I don't need to stay at home with my kids," like, because maybe we don't think right now in my
mm,
current situation that's possible. And so we think we're, like, sort of protecting ourselves. It's self-preservation, right? I don't wanna pine for something I can't have because that hurts.
mm,
But then I find so many people don't actually they tell themselves they don't know what they want, right? Like, I have no idea what I wanna do. I don't know. And it's because, like, you haven't let those desires come up
mm.
because you're constantly shutting yourself down, like, "That don't be ridiculous. We can't run a business. We can't make money, right? We can't only work 4
Mm,
hours a day. That's not possible." And I always say, like, just let yourself go there because at least you
mm,
know, "Oh, maybe I can't have that, but what's important to me right now is I want more time at home. I want more time with my kids. I want to make more money. I want whatever it is." Like,
mhm,
I have to know that in order for me to be able to do anything or create any life that gets me closer to that. And so I really think like allowing yourself just time to dream and be
mm.
ruthlessly honest with like, what is it that I want can help you really navigate towards a life that's more fitting for you.
Mm. Okay. There's so many things you said in there that I think are so important. And back to what you said at the very beginning about what happened when you became a mom, I had a very similar experience. I was like, I know I don't want to be home full time. I've always worked a lot though. And I know I also don't want that because that's not going to give me the space I want with my daughter. And it was hard to not have an example of like different types of balance. Like I felt like I didn't fit into um like either camp, sort of like you said, and maybe had comments from both camps about how I wasn't doing enough in either camp,
Right. Yeah.
and it was hard to navigate like, okay, what does balance look like? And I think this piece that you're saying around the grace, the permission to change, to try something. And then I would say like this spaciousness that you're talking about, like in order for reflection to come through or answers from yourself, you have to have space to ask yourself those questions and to listen, to not jump
Yeah.
straight from that question into a board meeting where 12 people are telling you their opinion about it, but
Right.
to really like sit with yourself. And for me also to sit with myself after I've done the thing. I think one of the biggest things that I've learned over the years is that I don't know how something's going to feel until I do it. Like I
Exactly.
I traveled to speak, came home for 3 days, traveled again to a big conference. It was the first time my daughter's almost 3. Is the first time I had done that with her, where I was like, I have no idea how this is going to go. Like, I have no idea if it's going to be better to just be on the road that whole time or to come back for 3 days. That's going to throw her off. I was like, I have no idea. So I was like, I'm going to try it, because how else am I going to figure it out? And then I scheduled on my calendar 2 days after I came home, like, sit and journal about that travel schedule. I feel like that has been so helpful for me to actually make sure I'm taking time to say, I'm trying this thing out, I'm practicing, no idea if it's going to work. And then, like, to really sink into, like, how did it feel to do that?
I love that so much. You're absolutely right. I think, like, we don't take the time to process things and actually, like, check in with what worked, what didn't work, what you do differently, what lit you up, what, like, drained your energy to get, like, that's how you learn more about yourself. But I will make one caveat, is that I think a lot of times we fall into this all or nothing thinking. And I think people think, like, unless I have luxurious amounts, like I have a whole week to, like, sit down and journal, then I can't do it. And none of us have that time typically. And so it's like, well, of course, I have kids and I am working, and who has the time to do this? And I will actually say, like, I don't think it takes all that much time. If you have it, great. If you can go on a weekend retreat, and in the desert and have the time, fantastic. But even if you don't have that time, it's really like, can I sit 20 minutes before I go to bed and journal? Like, can I, instead of scrolling Instagram, like, can I schedule that time for myself? Can I pick 1 hour a week to, like, take as my time of reflecting on that week or this thing that I'm going to do? Like, I think that when we don't realize really the compound effect that things have in our lives, and it's not, rarely ever is these very huge decisions or huge things that you need to do. It's like a million little baby steps. And I agree with you that just being able to schedule in time to check in with yourself, even if that's, like I said, like a 20-minute walk, once a week, to just be like, what is working, what is not for me. One journaling thing, like that, consistently over time makes such a huge difference. And so, like, I just say that because I think a lot of times people come, when I talk about doing the same things, I agree with you, like 100%. People will come to me and like, well, I don't have any time. And I'm like, well, then you need it more than anybody else, right? Like, if you find yourself scrambling around and completely frazzled every single day, like, if you can't find 20 minutes for yourself, then something has to change. Like, you need to change something in your life, because it's not true that you can't find that time. It's that you need to, like, give up the fear of asking somebody else for help, or, numbing ourselves with all this other stuff because we feel so bad. We're so tired. We're doing all this stuff. All of that stuff, again, is normal. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with it, but really, like, being honest. So, like, can I carve out 15 minutes in my lunch break instead of working at my computer and spend it journaling? Like, we can all kind of find that time.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. And like, one of my practices is like driving home from daycare, thinking about my 3 top priorities for the day. I realized, like, I would just, like, kind of zone out on the drive, or I'd call a friend or whatever. And I was like, you know what? Like, that's going to be my, like, day start. Like, it's like, what are my 3 priorities for the day? And sometimes I'll voice dictate it to myself, and, like, that's it. And so it's like, I'm doing that anyways. And I totally agree. And I'm a big fan of Dr. BJ Fogg's, like, habit and behavior design work. And he talks a lot about, like, anchoring behaviors. And so it's like that, one of my other big like positive self-talk practices is, while I wash my face every day, I'm already washing my face. I'm looking at myself in the mirror. Like, I'm already there. So let's just do the thing then.
I love that. I love that. That's, a perfect way of doing it. You're absolutely right. Yeah, that's the thing, is as we're doing other things, I do the same thing. And it's like, this is the thing, is I think that we think things take so much time, and they don't. They actually, if you're doing it, like, what takes time is us, like, worrying about doing it and thinking about it. I mean, for me, like, I'll take 10 minutes in the morning to just plan out what my day is going to be, and, like, the 3 things that I'm going to work on. And, like, that gives me so much more direction and helps me, like, stop wasting time constantly thinking, like, what's the next thing I'm going to do, or jumping from task to task. And so it's like, it's not that it's the amount of time, it's just the intentionality kind of behind it. It's like, when I'm doing this thing, can I be a little bit more intentional? Like you were just talking about, even, can I, in my drive, instead of listening to something on the radio, turning it off and just sitting with my own thoughts, like thinking through what the day is going to be or whatever it is. Yeah, I think the more intentional we become, the more we can find those like pockets of time where we can make it work.
Yeah. And I mean, if I'm totally honest, though, I think the times in my life I've avoided that more has been when I've been more nervous to listen to myself. Like I've been like, maybe something's going to come through that I don't want to come through because that's going to be really hard. You know, I demoted myself when I was leading an organization, and it took chronic pain to finally like really wake me up.
Mm-hmm.
And it was not the right fit between me and the board chair for a number of different reasons. And the response to everyone had was, well, why don't you just go lead another organization? Like just go be an executive director somewhere else. And I was like, because I don't want to be an executive director. And it was
Mm-hmm.
sort of this moment, but for a long time, I had been avoiding sitting with myself with some of those questions because gosh, I was scared of like all the identity shifting that was going to
Mm-hmm.
come with making those changes. And I think once I learned to have my own back more and also just adopted, I think, a lot more of what you're talking about, this sort of fluidity and like gray space and, you know, constant learning, those things certainly became easier. But sometimes it's hard to get quiet because we don't want to hear what we have to say.
100%, absolutely, and really, I mean, you are spot on, and it's a lot of the fear, and it's also, and that's why in the beginning when I talked about shame, like
Mm,
we have the worst inner critic voices, and when
mm,
you haven't learned how to manage that voice and turn it down, and really like learn to have your own back
mm,
and build your own self confidence and self love and self worth and self trust, all of those things, it's terrifying to be alone with your thoughts because they're all terrible, right?
mm,
It's like you're spending all day just beating yourself up. Like you're only focusing on the things you didn't do or the things
mm,
you did wrong or the time you yelled at your kid or whatever. And so it's like, who wants to spend time in there, right? It's like
mm,
that's why so many of us are, we're trying to like out hustle those negative voices. It's like if
mm.
I just keep myself busy, then maybe I'll feel good enough by the end of the day. Maybe I'll tell myself I did a good enough job as a mom or as an executive director or whatever, because I'm constantly just keeping busy
Mm,
because it's so terrifying to sit with that voice, right? And part of that is like, it's not until you can make that voice conscious, it's not until you can sit with it where you really start realizing how terrible it is. And you start really having to reckon, like, why am I talking to myself like this? Like, why am I would
mm.
never allow this with anybody else. I would never talk to anybody else like this, right? Um, and and so I just think that you're absolutely right. Is that we are scared of silence. Like that's why so
Mhm.
many of us are just, myself included. By the way, I'm not in any way like saying that but we're so distracted. Like we never want to be like still. So it's like either we're
Mhm.
on our phone, we're just scroll. It's like always like we have to fill every moment because I think that there is a lot of fear about like what happens in that silence.
I had my first coach when I think I was 21 or 22. It was before coaching like was really
Hmm.
the thing it is today. But I had a little professional development money from this nonprofit. And my boss was like, I think you're going to really love this woman. She's like a leadership coach. And I was running a lot at the time and also doing yoga. And I would leave for Shavasana. I would literally get up and walk out of the yoga class. And the woman, my coach was like, your goal today for this week is to stay for 1 minute of Shavasana. And I was like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't have time for this
Yeah.
effing, whatever. And she was like, nope, 1 minute you have to stay. And then
Mm.
ultimately worked me up to like, not leaving the class early. But
Yeah.
it's like that narrative around what we don't have time for. Like for me, the moment I hear myself say, I don't have time for something, that is like a huge, like indicator for me that like there's something to look at there. And it really started with that moment.
Absolutely. Oh, that's such a good thing to notice. And we're all like that, right? It's like we're
Yeah.
all so, it's almost this like currency, and it's like a badge of honor. It's like
Mm,
everybody's like, oh, she's so busy, just right, and we
mm,
keep ourselves on these hamster wheels. And I think that we're all terrified to, it's like we're terrified to quote unquote waste time. And then we end up wasting so much time because we just don't create any space for ourselves to like
mm,
rest and relax and be with ourselves. And so you're absolutely right to say, like, when you hear that voice saying there's not enough time, or I don't have time, or this is a waste of time, it's a huge indication to look at, like, is that really true? And what am I scared of just like, sitting with this? And I think more like what I work with a lot of people on is this, I try to teach my people if you can't learn to slow down and enjoy where you're at, there will never be a time that you will get there and all of a sudden, like, we
Mm,
think it's like, "Oh, once I get to some place, then all of a sudden I'm gonna have the money and the thing to, like, slow down," but you've trained your brain to constantly tell you that as soon as you're not doing anything, like, you should be doing more, you're being lazy, there's so much more, you have 800 projects you should get to, we should get a jump start, and when you have that, there is no other place that you just all of a sudden slow down and learn to relax. And so when you start realizing, like, this is your life today, not the future, like, today is the one life, like, right now. And if you can't take some time to, like, sit in shavasana and just breathe and relax and maybe enjoy the end of that yoga class, or take the 15 minutes to enjoy your cup of coffee before you just scarf it down and on to the next thing, like, there just doesn't come a time when that happens. So, like, if that is important to you, there's no other place you need to be. There's no more money that you need. There's no title that you need. Your kids don't need to be a certain age. It's like, how do I practice? Like you said, like 1 minute. How do I practice? I do a challenge in my group, and it's 30 days of, it's like a joy challenge, and it's find 15 minutes
mm,
to find something that brings you joy every single day. Because
mm,
once you learn to cultivate that, it becomes a part of your practice. You look for it. It's like, hey, can I
mm,
go on this walk and just listen to the birds and watch the trees and not need to listen to a podcast and multitask and,
mm.
whatever? Or how do I sit and drink my coffee because I love the taste of coffee? How do I actually stay present for it instead of not even realizing how I scarfed it down while I'm writing the email, right? Like, we don't need more, it's not these big things. Like, your life is made of all of these small moments.
Mm.
The more you can, like, slow down and tune into them, the more just joy you have in your life, which is like, what else is the purpose of all of this, right? All of the working and trying to make money and get the degree and the title and all this is like, at some place we think we'll just slow down. It's like, well, why not just slow down now? Why not do it
Yeah.
exactly where you are?
Yeah. Okay. I think that's literally some of the most important advice that like exists in the world, because I posted this thing on Instagram once, like I was going to do a series on success and nonprofits and, what different models of success look like, because it's not every nonprofit should scale, for example, like
Yeah.
some, sure, but not everyone. And so how do you start to find different models of what success looks like out there? And I remember when I posted about it, someone wrote me being like, oh, I really need this, whatever. And I wrote her back and I was like, you could be one of the episodes. What are you talking about? Like, and I think like that is this thing, right? We believe the other person has it figured out. The other organization
Yes.
has it figured out. But if you don't learn the skills to like cultivate space, joy, time now, you're not going to, when your organization is 5 million, 10 million, 100 million, because that's a skill, not a result of
Yes.
getting to some moment.
Absolutely. And it's like, the bigger it gets, it's just the more stress there is, the
Yes.
more things there are. It's not like all of a sudden it becomes easier. It's like, now I have
Right.
more employees and more things to handle. And so, yeah, if you don't learn how to cultivate it where you're at, it's just, there's never a time that it magically just changes and you learn how to slow down.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Before we have to go, I want to ask you one question about money, because
Let's
I
do
feel
it.
like you talk about money in a really, like some of the things you've posted about money have really sort of perked my ears up, particularly this like intersection that we sit at in sort of understanding our relationship to money, where we're sort of taught a certain amount of like hustle, scarcity mindset, capitalism, but also don't be greedy, don't like want
Mhm.
too much,
Mhm.
feel ashamed. Um,
Yeah.
so if thinking that this audience is mostly like nonprofit professionals who are one,
Yeah.
trying to figure out how to advocate for their own pay sometimes at reasonable levels because they're wildly underpaid in this sector, but also are advocating for money to move towards addressing like systematic inequalities. What are some sort of like money strategies or prompts that you feel like folks should be asking themselves or their organizations?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I don't know if I necessarily have prompts, but I think that what you were just referring to is, I think you just have to really uncover what your thoughts are about money. Like, you
Mm,
need to sit down and maybe there's a prompt, but it's like really just to ask yourself questions of like, what do I think about people that have money? What do I think about money?
mm,
What do I think about what I should do with money? Right? Because it's very illuminating. Like, if your belief is that people that have money are evil and greedy and, are whatever it is, like the reason that there's all these problems in the world. And like, clearly you're not going to want to seek it, right? Clearly it's going to
Mm,
feel shameful to ask for more, right? If we have all been conditioned with money beliefs, money is a neutral, I mean, it's as neutral as it gets. It's a piece of paper, right? It's not even a piece of paper at this point. It's just like a digital number on your screen. And so I guess like a exercise that is really fascinating, you guys can do right now is like just close your eyes right now and think of the number that you have in your bank account. Okay, so everybody just like think of it. If you're driving, don't close your eyes, but like think of the number that you have in your bank account. And then think of the feelings that come up. Like name what those feelings are. Okay. It might be like happy, excited, joy. It might be shame, embarrassment, fear, whatever, right? But I want you to realize that like nothing has actually happened, right? You thought of a number and you conjured up all of these feelings from a number. The number doesn't mean anything, except there's so much loaded thoughts around that number, around like, am I good with money? Should I have more by this age? Other people are so much better with it than me. I should have known how to invest it, whatever it is. Like that's all of the anxiety that comes around money. And for a lot of us, like you were just mentioning, one of the things I talk about is that it's not as though it's like you were just born and you have, like a lot of us think like our thoughts are true, right? As if like, yeah, you shouldn't want more than you need, let's say. Like you should only want a certain amount. And if you want more, then you're greedy, right? That's not like some kind of like universal truth. It's just a thought that has been given to us. And it is a thought that is very prevalent in basically every religion. And so when you are raised around religion, which all of us pretty much are in every society, you have been taught that like, to like, isn't it the love of money is the root of all evil, and all of these sayings that we've been given. And so of course then you feel shame for wanting the resource that you absolutely need in every aspect of our society, right? Like where you live, where your kids go to school, the healthcare you can afford, the food you can afford, all of that is run by money. And yet we're like, oh, but I can't want too much, right? I don't like, I need it, so I need to want it and I need to work for it, but I don't want to be a bad person. And I will also say that, like, when you really look at the history of money, what's fascinating is at the times that religions kind of evolved, and in the beginning, when we used, let's say, gold or other materials as money, it was a very like zero sum game, right? It was like, if I take this gold, I'm taking it away from somebody else. There's only, let's say, a pie, and what we take. So there was a direct kind of correlation of if I make more, then you make less, right? But since the invention of credit, that just is no longer true, right? They literally print money. And it's not as though, like, if I make more, I'm taking away from somebody else. And I think we just have to understand these concepts, right? We have to understand what was really big for me. And I will say for your people, like I was a public defender, right? And so I went to law school and I really went never wanting to make money. Like that wasn't my goal. And I had really prided myself on being a quote unquote good person. And it's like part of this martyr syndrome, which I'm assuming a lot of people in the nonprofit world have, where it's like, if you're a good person, then like you don't actually care about money and you're going to go on and do these, I don't know, noble things, which doesn't concern itself with money. And it's just, we just do such a disservice by having that. Because one, like all that did for me was burn me out because I was working so hard and not being able to meet my own needs or even the things that I wanted, right? Like I wasn't making as much money as I needed to pay off my loans. And so all that did was take me out of the game. Like I was like, I have to quit this. I can't continue doing this work, right? And I didn't know this stuff then, where it's like, of course I should have been paid much more than I was being paid in order to do this vital service. And just because society didn't think it was worth it doesn't mean that I needed to feel guilty for wanting that. And I think like a lot of people who have then equated not wanting money with being a good person, like again, it's just a thought. Like there's no basis for that. And you have to really look at like how much is that thought hindering me in my life? How much is it hindering what I go after? How much is it hindering like what I tend to seek? And I started really thinking about like the other side of that zero sum game when I started thinking like if I get money, it doesn't take away from people. But I really started thinking like if I don't make money, it doesn't all of a sudden go to the people that need it. It doesn't just magically, it's not like me being like, don't give me anymore, give it to the homeless person, right? Give it to the single mother who needs it. Like that's not who it's going to. So like I get to decide, okay, if I have the skills to make money, if I have the
Mm,
knowledge, yes, I have privilege, I have tons of things that other people didn't have. Why am I taking myself out of that game, right? I actually think I'm a much better steward of money. And so why
mm,
wouldn't I, I think especially as women, people of color, other marginalized groups, like the more we make money in this world that operates on money, the better it is for all of us. And so you have to start adopting those thoughts, right? And I'm not saying that it has to be the most important thing in your life and you have to want, forego everything to make as much money. You get to decide what you want with money. I just think that you have to uncover, what are my thoughts? If I have deep shame around wanting money, that is going to affect everything I do in my career, right? And so I have to clean that up before I know, like, like what is it? Am I going to ask for that raise? Am I going to advocate for myself? And I'll just say, I know I've blabbered on, but I'm going to say one more thing. I'll just tell you like a little anecdote. My husband also owns a company, and he has about 50 employees, and he was noticing that like at his annual reviews, all of the men, regardless of their performance, asked for raises, and would ask for more than what would typically be given, like 15%, like very large raises, 20%. I mean, just like
mhm.
outrageously kind of more than what they, none of the women, and he has about 50% men and women, would ask for a raise. Not one, right? They would just, and he would give it to them based
Wow.
off performance, but not one would advocate for themselves. And this is part of, because of their beliefs about money, right? If women have been socialized to believe, like, just be grateful you got a seat at the table, don't rock the
Mhm.
boat, make sure everybody likes you, don't talk about money. That's like, not acceptable. They're going to think you're greedy. They're going to not like you. Now, I'm not saying there isn't misogyny and the patriarchy at play, and women do get labeled difficult, and women may get, there's different consequences. So I'm not trying to deny that all of those things exist. And while we should work on like the equal pay and ending that kind of pay gap, I think women in general, like more specifically than even men, is like we have to realize, like, how much am I also playing into this because I've socialized these thoughts, and so I don't advocate for myself. I don't look for the job that's paying more. I don't, because I want to be a quote unquote good person. I want people to like me, and so that's why I just think it's so important to clear up these thoughts. It's because you under earn, right? Like you seek out places where you're maybe more valued. You don't go hard for your own qualifications to be like, this is what I deserve, right?
Mhm.
You tend to underplay your hand, and that's because there's so much shame around asking for money. And so it's a matter of like just getting what you deserve. Like if a male is going to get that same amount at that company, like knowing you deserve that requires you to like clean up that guilt that you have for asking for it.
Yes. Okay. Double clicking on all of that. I know we have to get you to school. So do you want to tell everyone one, where they can find you and like the best way to connect with you? And I also invite guests to share a nonprofit that they love, that's near and dear to their heart, for folks to check out if one comes to mind for you.
Oh yeah, so many. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, you can you can find me at social media. Lessons from a Quitter on Instagram is probably the place I hang out the most. So like come by, send me a DM. But you can really find me anywhere at Lessons from a Quitter. My website is lessonsfromaquitter.com, and the podcast, since you're listening to podcasts, is under the same name. You can find it everywhere. I would love to hear from you guys, like, and let me know that you listened to this episode. Say hi. I love connecting with people. And I have a couple organizations that are really near and dear to my heart. One is Second Harvest Food Bank, that's in Orange County. It's the largest food bank in, I don't know if it's Southern California or just Orange County, but they do some incredible work helping basically fund most of the food kitchens and pantries and a lot of the
Mm.
other food banks in and around Southern California. So if anybody is interested in what they do, they're doing some really incredible things of being able to leverage each dollar for the maximum and be able to help the growing need of families that are food scarce. So I would say that's one that I would definitely check out.
Amazing. Thank you so much for this conversation and for joining me today. It was wonderful having you.
Thank you so much for having me. This was so much fun.